Welcome. If you're listening to this, chances are you care about staying active, or you've had a recent reminder of how quickly that can change, often due to pain. Most people don't see it coming. They're coping, carrying on, and doing what they've always done, until one ordinary moment becomes one step too far.
Welcome to the 3 Rules to Stay Active for Life. I'm Gavin Routledge, a lifestyle medicine professional, osteopath and author. And in this podcast, I'll share a few simple frameworks to help you suffer less pain and feel more confident about your current and future health. Let me ask you a question. If you had a condition that was quietly increasing your risk of diabetes, heart disease, dementia, stroke, and even some cancers, would you want to know about it? Most people would. The problem is that many people have exactly this condition and don't know it. Not because they're ignoring it, they just don't know, because it often has no obvious symptoms at all. You don't feel unwell in the early stages of this disease. It is called metabolic syndrome. And it's thought that around 1 in 4 adults in the UK already have metabolic syndrome. So if you're listening to this while driving or out in a cafe, walking the dog, look around. Roughly 1 in every 4 adults you see is likely to have this, and many of them won't know it. And today I'd like to explain what it is, why it matters, and what you can do about it. One of the reasons I like my model, the cliff of pain and the cliff of health, is that problems rarely appear overnight. They accumulate quietly. Then one day you're surprised by where you've ended up in the sea of suffering. So, for instance, a heart attack doesn't happen overnight. Type 2 diabetes doesn't happen overnight. Most people don't suddenly develop high blood pressure. These things often develop over many years. You slowly edge your way closer to the edge of the cliff. And metabolic syndrome is one of the clearest examples of that process. See, metabolic syndrome isn't a single disease. It's not like cancer where there's a specific test or a scan you can do. Metabolic syndrome is a collection of essentially warning signs that often come together. If you have 3 of the 5 following, then you have metabolic syndrome. So the 5 elements are increased waist circumference, elevated blood sugar, elevated blood pressure, elevated triglycerides, think cholesterol, or low HDL, which is often referred to as good cholesterol. Now, as I say, you don't need all of them. 3 out of 5 will tick the box, and the more of them you have, the greater your risk. That's what metabolic syndrome really is. It's a warning sign that your metabolism is beginning to struggle. Now, you may be thinking, that's all very interesting, Gavin, but what has that got to do with me? Well, potentially quite a lot, because metabolic syndrome dramatically increases the risk of, as I said earlier, type 2 diabetes, heart attacks, strokes, dementia, fatty liver disease, a number of cancers. These illnesses don't just shorten your life, they reduce the quality of the life you have left. Early on, your energy drops. You feel unwell more often. You're more prone to infections. It takes you longer to recover from those infections. And because you have less energy, you move less. You become less resilient. And over time, that erodes your independence. As I have often said, nobody wakes up one morning with metabolic syndrome, just as nobody wakes up one morning and discovers they've become weak or unfit or frail. These things happen gradually through hundreds and thousands of tiny decisions and habits repeated over time. And because the process is gradual, that's why it often goes unnoticed until something finally happens that gets your attention. And that's when you go and get tests from the doctor. And the tests confirm what is wrong with you. But wouldn't it be better to detect that drift earlier? Of course, you could have blood tests every couple of years to look at your lipids, HDL, LDL, triglycerides, and you could check your blood pressure regularly and your blood sugar. But the simplest measure of all, and one that's hugely predictive of this syndrome, is one of those 5 elements, and that is your increasing waistline. And especially your waistline compared to your height. It's worth pointing out that around 2/3 of adults in the UK are now overweight or living with obesity, and obesity peaks in the 55 to 74 age group. Right, jumping back, as I was saying, one of the simplest measures of metabolic health is your waistline. Your waist circumference gives us a clue about how much fat is being stored around the organs inside your belly. And that type of fat is strongly associated with metabolic disease. And here is the simple rule of thumb. Ideally, your waist measurement, whether you measure in centimeters or inches, doesn't matter, but your waist measurement should be less than half your height. So if you're 180 centimeters tall, that's around 6 feet, your waist should ideally be less than 90 centimeters. It's not a perfect measure. It's not totally predictive either, but it is very strongly predictive of metabolic syndrome, is your waist to height ratio. So this is an extremely powerful early sign that you can monitor yourself. Now, like most things we discuss on this podcast, there usually isn't one cause. There are multiple contributors to metabolic syndrome. Common ones include inactivity, so lack of physical activity, poor sleep, excess calorie intake, highly processed foods, chronic stress, so long-term stress, and ultimately loss of muscle mass, which is very common with age. And this last one, the loss of muscle mass, is particularly interesting to me because, you see, muscle isn't just there to help you move, and we've covered this in previous podcast episodes. Muscle acts like a sponge for glucose. So glucose is the most commonly used source of energy. It's that basic unit of energy that you get from eating food. You break everything down into glucose typically, and the cells use that glucose to produce energy. And muscle acts like a sponge for glucose. One of the biggest places your body stores and particularly uses energy, is muscle. So the more muscle you have as you get older, the better for your metabolism, which is one reason that strength training becomes so important as we age. And why the strength episode we covered recently is about much more than simply lifting weights. It's about ensuring that your metabolism stays healthy in the long run and staving off all those other illnesses that can be associated with metabolic syndrome. Now, let me tell you a story. I featured this chap. We call him John, not his real name. We'll call him John. I wrote about John in my book, Pain-Free and Confident Golf, which is very much about back pain in golfers. So we call him John, and John had persistent lower back pain, which was keeping him off the golf course. His pain was averaging 6 out of 10 most days. He was significantly overweight, and he felt that losing weight would probably help his back, and he was probably right in that. But rather than trying to change everything at once, he focused on just one thing. He substantially reduced his carbohydrate intake. And something remarkable happened. Within 2 days, his pain dropped from around 6 out of 10 to around 3 out of 10. Now, way too early for significant weight loss. So this was not due to weight loss. It just, unfortunately, doesn't happen that quickly, I'm sure you know. What had changed, though, was his metabolism. And for some people, some of the time, excess carbohydrates can contribute to inflammation and poorer blood sugar regulation. which also drives inflammation. So by changing what he was eating dramatically, not necessarily the number of calories, but certainly the nature of those calories, what we call macronutrients, he reduced the carbohydrate intake, and in turn that reduced his background inflammation, which was one of the factors driving his back pain. Not magic, just pure natural physiology. His back wasn't suddenly repaired. He had just dramatically reduced the amount of inflammation in his body, including presumably in his back. So the conditions that his body was operating in had changed, and his pain changed accordingly. So what can you do? The good news is that metabolic health often responds, as I was saying, surprisingly quickly. Not over months, sometimes in days and weeks. You don't need perfection here. You just need to be going in the right direction. And how do you know? Start by measuring. Know your waist measurement, and ideally know your waist to height ratio. Move more. Build strength. Interrupt prolonged sitting. We covered it in the last episode. Prioritize good sleep. All of these things pull you back from the edge by boosting your metabolism. And you'll notice that many of them are things, as I said, we've discussed in previous episodes, because all of these factors work together. So, metabolic syndrome is what happens when you quietly drift towards the edge of the cliff of health. You don't notice it maybe at first. Then one day, your energy just isn't what it used to be. Your fitness isn't what it used to be. Your resilience isn't what it used to be. And eventually, you fall off that cliff. And like most people in the sea of suffering, you focus on regaining the cliff top. And that often means using medication. But remember, it wasn't the absence of medication that pushed you towards the edge. It was your slowly increasing waistline and the factors that caused that. So to make a sustainable improvement, the medication isn't going to do it. That's a short-term fix. You have to address the real underlying causes, those risks that pushed you towards the edge of the cliff. Using medication is a short-term solution. Not to be decried, it definitely has a role, but if you don't address those background risk factors, it's very hard to get back from the edge. And the good news is that metabolic syndrome is often reversible, especially in the first few years. The earlier you spot it, the easier it is to change course. So, if you would like to find out where you are, why not start by just measuring your waist height ratio, and I will see you in the next episode. If today's episode sparked a shift in how you think about your body or your health, don't try to change everything at once. Choose one small action this week, something that nudges you towards staying active rather than avoiding discomfort. That's how confidence is rebuilt. You'll find further episodes exploring the 3 rules and the habits that matter most, not by doing more, but by doing things better. This program is provided for general information only and should not be taken as medical advice. If you have persistent or worsening symptoms, please seek appropriate medical guidance.